I'm Violet, 28, a financial analyst who worked hard to build excellent credit. Since graduating college, I've always helped my parents financially when they needed it. But nothing prepared me for the shock of discovering a $100,000 charge on my credit card. My parents had used it to fund my sister's wedding without my permission. The worst part, when I refused to pay, they called me ungrateful. If you've ever had family take advantage of your financial stability, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe to join me through this financial nightmare. I grew up in a modest home in suburban Pennsylvania. My parents, Jack and Marie, were hardworking but always seemed to be living paycheck to paycheck. Dad worked as a manager at a local hardware store, while Mom was an administrative assistant at an insurance company. They made enough to keep us comfortable, but there were always hushed conversations about bills and occasional arguments about money that my sister Lisa and I would overhear from our bedrooms. From an early age, I developed a fascination with finances. While other kids spent their allowance on candy and toys, I saved mine in a purple piggy bank my grandmother had given me. By high school, I was reading finance books and planning my future. I was determined to create a different financial reality for myself than what I had witnessed growing up. My academic focus paid off when I received a partial scholarship to study business at Penn State. Even with the scholarship, I worked 2 part-time jobs to cover expenses and took out minimal student loans. I graduated with honors and landed a job at a prestigious financial firm in Philadelphia. The starting salary wasn't amazing and it was stable, and I had a clear path to advancement. Lisa, 4 years younger than me, took a different route. She was the creative one, more interested in art and fashion than spreadsheets and investments. After high school, she decided against college and bounced between retail jobs, occasionally taking photography classes at a community college. My parents never pushed her the way they had pushed me academically. When I got my first big promotion at work 3 years after graduation, my parents called with news of their own. The furnace in their house had died, and they needed $4,000 for a new one. Without hesitation, I transferred the money to them. They promised to pay me back, but I knew they probably wouldn't, and I was okay with that. After all, they had raised me, supported my education, and now it was my turn to help them. That first request opened a floodgate. Over the next few years, I helped them replace their roof, paid off their credit card debt twice, and covered property taxes when they came up short. I set up a separate savings account that I called my family fund and automatically transferred money to it each month, anticipating these requests would continue. Lisa moved back home after a breakup when I was 26. A few months later, she started dating Jackson Sullivan, whose family owned a chain of successful car dealerships across the Northeast. I noticed a change in my parents' behavior almost immediately. They started talking about upgrading their home, buying new furniture, and even taking vacations they couldn't afford. It was clear they wanted to impress Jackson's family. When Lisa and Jackson got engaged after a year of dating, my parents called me ecstatic. I was happy for my sister, but a sense of foreboding crept in when my mother mentioned, "The Sullivans will expect a certain type of wedding, of course." During an early planning dinner, my mother talked about designer dresses, exotic flower arrangements, and a reception at the Grand, the most exclusive venue in Philadelphia. When I gently suggested setting a realistic budget first, my father waved his hand dismissively. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime event, Violet," he said. "We can't embarrass ourselves in front of the Sullivans. We'll figure out the money part." The way he glanced at me when he said "figure out" made me uncomfortable, but I pushed the feeling aside. Surely they wouldn't expect me to foot the entire bill for an extravagant wedding. How wrong I was. It was a Tuesday morning in April when everything fell apart. I was doing my monthly financial review over coffee at my kitchen table. I believe in checking every transaction, a habit that has served me well professionally and personally. As I scrolled through my credit card statement online, my heart nearly stopped. There were multiple charges I didn't recognize. $30,000 to the Grand Hotel and Venue, $25,000 to Elite Catering Services, $15,000 to Botanical Elegance Florists, $10,000 to Vera's Bridal Boutique, $8,000 to Sullivan Photography, no relation to Jackson, $7,000, to Premier Transportation, and several smaller charges for various wedding services. Together they totaled just over $100,000. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly knocked over my coffee. This had to be fraud. I immediately called my credit card company, navigating through the automated system while trying to stay calm. When I finally reached a representative, I explained the situation, expecting a straightforward fraud resolution process. "Ms. Adams, those charges were authorized using your card ending in 4872, the representative said. "The card was physically present for these transactions, and the authorization code matches." "That's impossible," I insisted. "I have my card right here." I pulled my wallet from my purse and froze. My emergency credit card. The one with a high limit that I kept for major unexpected expenses wasn't in its usual slot. "One moment," I told the representative. "Can you tell me who made these purchases?" After verifying my identity again, the representative informed me the name given for these transactions was Marie Adams, my mother. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I thanked the representative, ended the call, and immediately dialed my mother's number. She answered on the fourth ring, sounding cheery. "Oh, Violet, I was just about to call you. We finalized the menu for the wedding yesterday, and it's going to be spectacular." "Mom," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, "did you use my credit card to pay for Lisa's wedding expenses?" There was a brief pause, then she replied in a casual tone that made my blood boil. "We needed to give Lisa the wedding she deserves, honey. You know how important this is. The Sullivans expect a certain standard. You spent over $100,000 on my credit card without asking me." My voice rose despite my efforts to remain calm. "Don't be so dramatic, Violet," she said dismissively. "You've always been so good with money. This is just a temporary thing. We'll figure it out after the wedding." "Figure it out, Mom. This is theft." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Don't use that word with me, young lady. We're family. We just needed to secure the vendors before they got booked up. You wouldn't want Lisa to lose her dream venue, would you?" I suddenly remembered the emergency card I had given them years ago when Dad had his minor heart scare. It was only supposed to be used for medical emergencies. I had completely forgotten about it, and they had obviously kept it all these years. "Where did you even get my card?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. "That emergency card you gave us. Don't worry, this was an emergency. The Grand was about to book our date for another wedding." I felt sick to my stomach. This betrayal went beyond anything I could have imagined. After hanging up with my mother, I sat in shocked silence for several minutes before grabbing my car keys. This wasn't a conversation to have over the phone. I needed to see their faces when they explained themselves. The drive to my parents' house, normally a peaceful 45 minutes, was a blur of anger and disbelief. When I arrived, I was surprised to see not only my parents' car, but also Lisa's and an expensive SUV I recognized as Jackson's in the driveway. Perfect. Everyone involved could hear what I had to say. I didn't even knock, using my old key to enter the house. They were all sitting in the living room, gathered around a coffee table covered with wedding magazines and sample invitations. The conversation stopped abruptly when I walked in. "Violet," my mother exclaimed with forced cheerfulness. "What a nice surprise. We were just discussing the seating arrangements. Come join us." "Cut the act, Mom," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I know what you did. I know about the charges on my credit card." The room fell silent. Lisa looked down at her hands. Jackson shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and my father cleared his throat. "Now, Violet," my father began in that patronizing tone he used when he thought he was being the voice of reason, "there's no need to make a scene. We were going to discuss this with you. When, after you maxed out my credit card, after you ruined my credit score, after the wedding," my voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "You're overreacting," my mother said. "Lisa needs this wedding to make a good impression on Jackson's family. You know they're used to a certain lifestyle." I looked at Jackson, whose face had turned red with embarrassment. "Did you know about this?" I asked him directly. "No," he said quietly, meeting my eyes. "I had no idea they were using your card. My parents offered to help with the wedding costs, but Marie and Jack said they had it covered. My mother shot him an annoyed look before turning back to me. We planned to pay it back eventually, Violet. We just needed to secure all the vendors now. Wedding venues book up years in advance these days. Eventually, with what money? I demanded. You can barely cover your monthly expenses without my help. We thought, my father hesitated. We thought maybe after the wedding Jackson's family might help out, or that you'd see this was a good investment in Lisa's future. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A good investment. This is credit card fraud. Do you understand that you could go to jail for this? Lisa finally spoke up, her voice small. Violet, please. This wedding means everything to me. I thought you'd want to help make my special day perfect. After all, you're doing so well financially, and family helps family, right? I stared at my sister in disbelief. Lisa, I would have helped you have a beautiful wedding if you'd asked. I would have contributed what I could afford, but no one asked me. Instead, my card was stolen, and $100,000 was spent without my knowledge or permission. After all we've done for you, my mother interjected, her voice taking on the martyred tone I knew so well. We sacrificed so much for your education, your opportunities. This is how you repay us, by threatening your own parents over money. Don't try to guilt me, Mom. I've been helping you financially for years without complaint. I've paid your property taxes, your medical bills, fixed your roof. I've never once hesitated to help when you needed it, but this crosses every line. You owe this family, my father said firmly. We made you who you are. One wedding is a small price to pay for everything we've given you. I looked around the room at the faces of my family. My parents' expressions were a mix of entitlement and defensive anger. Lisa looked torn between guilt and resentment. Only Jackson seemed to understand the gravity of what had happened, his discomfort evident. I'm calling the credit card company to report this as fraud, I said finally. I'm giving you one chance to come up with a repayment plan before I involve the police. My mother gasped dramatically. You would send your own parents to jail over money. This isn't about money, I replied, my voice breaking slightly. This is about trust and respect, both of which you've completely violated. I turned and walked out, ignoring their calls for me to come back and be reasonable. As I got into my car, I realized my hands were shaking. The family I thought I knew was unrecognizable to me now. The next few weeks were a nightmare. My parents launched a full-scale campaign to pressure me into dropping the fraud claim and accepting responsibility for their actions. They enlisted every family member they could, spinning a story that painted me as the villain. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from relatives. Aunt Patricia called to tell me how disappointed she was in my selfish behavior. Uncle Robert texted to remind me that blood is thicker than water and that some things are more important than money. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had strong opinions about my financial responsibilities to the family. My mother sent daily emotional texts alternating between guilt trips and vague threats about how this would destroy the family forever. My father, usually more reserved, left stern voicemails about my obligations and duty to support my sister's happiness. The worst was when my grandmother called. At 82, she was the family matriarch, and her opinion carried weight. Violet, she said, her voice wavering, I never thought I'd live to see the day when my own granddaughter would tear this family apart over something as trivial as money. In my day, family came first no matter what. I tried to explain the situation, but she had already made up her mind based on whatever version of events my parents had shared with her. The call ended with her telling me to do the right thing before it was too late. Meanwhile, Lisa alternated between tearful pleas and angry accusations. You're ruining the most important day of my life, she sobbed during one call. Jackson's parents are starting to ask questions about why we're delaying vendor payments. Do you want me to be humiliated in front of them? I felt trapped and isolated. The only people supporting my decision were my close friends and colleagues, who were horrified by what my family had done. My best friend Taylor urged me to press charges, immediately arguing that my parents needed to face consequences for their actions. My colleague Marcus, who had gone through something similar with his brother, recommended I consult a lawyer right away. Taking Marcus's advice, I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer who specialized in financial fraud cases. The consultation fee was steep, but I needed to understand my options. The lawyer's office was in a sleek downtown building, a stark contrast to the emotional chaos I was experiencing. Unfortunately, Ms. Adams, what your parents did constitutes identity theft and credit card fraud, regardless of your relationship to them, the lawyer explained after hearing my story. The fact that you previously gave them a card for emergencies might complicate things slightly, but their unauthorized use of it for non-emergency purposes, especially of this magnitude, is still illegal. She outlined my options. I could pursue criminal charges which might result in my parents facing jail time, or I could handle it as a civil matter and focus on getting the money back. Either way, I needed to report the fraud to the credit card company to protect my own financial standing. After the meeting, I went to my bank to discuss the impact on my credit and finances. The personal banker's expression grew increasingly grim as I explained the situation. This level of debt will significantly impact your debt-to-income ratio, he explained. If you accept these charges as legitimate, it could affect your ability to qualify for a mortgage in the future, and the interest alone will be substantial. That night, I barely slept. The weight of the decision I faced felt crushing. If I pursued fraud charges, I could permanently damage my relationship with my family. If I accepted the debt, I would be enabling their behavior and potentially ruining my financial future. The next morning, I received a text from my mother that pushed me over the edge. We've added you as maid of honor on the wedding program. The designer needs your measurements for the dress ASAP. The assumption that I would not only pay for the wedding, but participate in it as if nothing had happened was the final straw. Something inside me broke, but in that breaking, I found clarity. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about standing up for myself and refusing to be manipulated any longer. That afternoon, I received an official wedding invitation in the mail with a handwritten note from Lisa. Can't wait to have you by my side on my special day. Love you, sis. It was as if I was living in an alternate reality where the $100,000 theft had never happened. The breaking point came during a dinner that my parents arranged with Jackson's family. They had invited me under the pretense of working things out as a family, but I quickly realized their real motive was to present a united front to the Sullivans. The dinner was at an upscale restaurant I could never afford on my analyst salary. When I arrived, everyone was already seated, my parents Lisa and Jackson's parents Richard and Catherine Sullivan. The elder Sullivans were impeccably dressed and carried themselves with the quiet confidence of old money. Violet, so glad you could join us, my mother said with a strained smile. We were just telling Richard and Catherine about the gorgeous floral arrangements we've selected. I nodded politely and took the only empty seat directly across from Catherine Sullivan, who studied me with intelligent eyes. We're thrilled about the wedding, Catherine said warmly. Jackson tells us you're in finance. That must be fascinating work. Before I could respond, my father jumped in. Violet's been an absolute godsend with helping organize the financial aspects of the wedding. We couldn't have managed such a spectacular event without her. The implication was clear. They were presenting me as a willing participant in their scheme. I felt a surge of anger but held my tongue, not wanting to create a scene in the restaurant. The conversation continued in this vein with my parents, making grandiose statements about the wedding plans while shooting me warning glances whenever I opened my mouth. Lisa looked increasingly uncomfortable, and Jackson kept giving me apologetic looks. The breaking point came when the server brought the dessert menu and my father raised his glass in a toast. To family, he said, and to Violet, whose generosity is making this wonderful celebration possible. Something inside me snapped. I set my glass down without drinking. Actually, I said calmly, looking directly at Richard and Catherine, there's something you should know. I'm not willingly financing this wedding. My parents stole my emergency credit card and charged over $100,000 without my knowledge or consent. The table fell silent. My mother's face drained of color and my father nearly choked on his wine. Violet, my mother hissed. This is hardly the time or place. When would be a good time, Mom, after you've committed more fraud in my name, after you've completely ruined my credit? I turned back to the Sullivans, who looked shocked. I've been trying to resolve this privately, but my parents refuse to acknowledge what they've done. They expect me to accept this debt and pretend it's a gift. Catherine Sullivan recovered first. I had no idea, she said, her voice gentle but firm. Jack Marie, is this true? My father tried to laugh it off. Violet's exaggerating. We simply used her card to secure the vendors. It's a family matter that's gotten blown out of proportion. $100,000 is not blown out of proportion, I countered. It's theft, plain and simple. After everything we've done for you, my mother said, her voice rising, this is how you repay us, by humiliating us in public. You've always been selfish, Violet, but this takes it to a new level. I'm selfish. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I've been supporting you financially for years. I've never once complained about helping with bills, repairs, or medical expenses. But this crossed every line, and you know it. Lisa suddenly burst into tears. I knew about the card, she admitted, looking at me with red eyes. They told me you had agreed to help, but wanted to keep it quiet. I should have called you directly to thank you, but they said you were being modest about it. I'm so sorry, Violet. Jackson looked horrified. Mr. and Mrs. Adams, if you needed help with wedding costs, my parents and I would have been happy to contribute. There was no need to do this. We would have gladly helped, Richard Sullivan confirmed, his expression serious. A wedding should be a joyous occasion, not the cause of financial fraud and family discord. My parents seemed to realize they had miscalculated badly. My father attempted damage control. Perhaps we should discuss this at home as a family, he suggested. There's nothing to discuss, I said firmly. I've made my decision. I'm reporting this as fraud to the credit card company and the authorities. If you have any hope of avoiding criminal charges, you'll need to work out a repayment plan immediately. My mother's face contorted with anger. You ungrateful, selfish girl, after all we sacrificed for you, if you do this, you're no longer our daughter. I stood up surprisingly steady despite the emotional turmoil. That's your choice to make. But I won't be a victim of financial abuse any longer, not even from my own parents. As I walked out of the restaurant, I felt a strange mix of devastation and relief. The worst had happened, the confrontation I'd feared, the family rupture I'd dreaded. But with it came a sense of liberation. For the first time in my adult life, I had stood up for myself against my parents' manipulation, and despite the pain, it felt right. The aftermath of my decision was both painful and liberating. The day after the disastrous dinner, I formally reported the fraud to my credit card company and filed a police report. The detective who took my statement was kind but straightforward about what would happen next. Your parents will be contacted for questioning, she explained. Given the amount involved, this is a felony offense. I understand this is difficult, but you're doing the right thing by protecting yourself. Within a week, my parents received official notice of the fraud investigation. The reality of the situation finally seemed to hit them. My father called, his voice lacking the righteous indignation of our previous conversations. Violet, please, he said, sounding genuinely frightened for the first time. We can't have a criminal record at our age. We'd lose everything. I remained firm. You should have thought about that before stealing from me. Meanwhile, Lisa and Jackson had postponed the wedding indefinitely. Lisa called me a few days after the dinner, sounding exhausted and remorseful. I never wanted any of this, she said. I got caught up in Mom and Dad's fantasy of impressing Jackson's family. I should have stood up to them when they first suggested using your card. Why didn't you call me directly? I asked, still hurt by her complicity. I was a coward, she admitted. Part of me suspected something wasn't right, but it was easier to believe their story that you had agreed to it. I'm so sorry, Violet. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know I'm truly sorry. Surprisingly, Jackson and his parents became unexpected allies. Catherine Sullivan called me personally to express her support. What your parents did was unconscionable, she said firmly. Jackson loves Lisa, but we completely support your decision to hold your parents accountable. If there's anything we can do to help, please let us know. Jackson's parents even offered to help with a more modest wedding when the time was right. We don't care about extravagance, Catherine assured me. We just want Jackson and Lisa to be happy. As the legal process moved forward, my parents became increasingly desperate. They realized the seriousness of their actions when their attorney explained the potential consequences: possible jail time, hefty fines, and a permanent criminal record. My mother's texts changed from accusatory to pleading. Please, Violet, we're your parents. We made a terrible mistake. Don't let it end this way. My father, always more practical, finally proposed a concrete repayment plan. They would sell their house, downsize dramatically, and use the equity to repay my card. It was the first responsible suggestion they'd made since this ordeal began. After consulting with my lawyer, I agreed to a settlement. If they sold their house and repaid the full amount, plus my legal fees, I would drop the criminal charges. It was a difficult decision, but I didn't want my parents to go to jail. I just wanted them to understand the gravity of what they'd done and make restitution. The process of selling their home was quick but painful. They had lived there for over 30 years, and watching them pack up decades of memories brought me no joy, despite everything they had done. They moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment, a significant downgrade from the 4-bedroom house where I'd grown up. Throughout all of this, I struggled with conflicting emotions. Part of me felt guilty for causing such upheaval in my family's life. Another part remained angry and hurt by their betrayal. The holidays were particularly difficult. For the first time in my life, I spent Thanksgiving alone, unable to face a family gathering, but also unwilling to accept invitations from well-meaning friends who couldn't understand the complexity of what I was feeling. Lisa made efforts to maintain our relationship, though things remained strained. She and Jackson had moved forward with plans for a small, intimate wedding that they could afford themselves. She didn't ask me to be her maid of honor again, which was a relief. I wasn't sure I could stand beside her so soon after everything that had happened, but I also didn't want to refuse and cause more pain. The hardest part was realizing that the dynamic with my parents might never be the same. The unconditional trust I once had was gone, replaced by caution and clear boundaries. Every interaction felt weighted with the past, and I found myself analyzing their words for manipulation or guilt trips. Yet even in this painful aftermath, I found unexpected strength. I had stood up for myself in a way I never had before, and in doing so, discovered that I could survive one of my worst fears: disappointing and distancing myself from my family. 6 months after that fateful credit card statement, I sat in my apartment reviewing my finances with a sense of cautious optimism. The settlement with my parents had been completed. They had sold their house, repaid the full amount charged to my card, and covered my legal expenses as agreed. My credit score, which had taken a hit during the ordeal, was slowly recovering. The process of healing my relationship with my family was proving more complicated than fixing my finances. After the initial legal matters were settled, I had limited contact with my parents for several weeks, needing space to process everything that had happened. Eventually, at Lisa's gentle urging, I agreed to meet them for coffee at a neutral location. The conversation was awkward and stilted at first. My father looked older than I remembered, the stress of recent months evident in the new lines on his face. My mother, usually so confident and talkative, seemed subdued. "We've been seeing a financial counselor," my father told me hesitantly, "learning to budget properly for the first time in our lives. And we've started family therapy," my mother added. "We're trying to understand why we did what we did to you." It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was a start. I wasn't ready to fully trust them again, but I was willing to take small steps toward rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms. I had also taken steps to protect myself financially. I closed all my old accounts and opened new ones at a different bank. I set up fraud alerts on my credit and regularly monitored all my statements. I even took a weekend workshop on setting healthy boundaries, which helped me recognize patterns in my family dynamics that I had previously accepted as normal. My relationship with Lisa had begun to heal more quickly. Without our parents' influence, we had several honest conversations about the wedding debacle in our childhood. She admitted feeling overshadowed by my academic success growing up, which had made her more susceptible to our parents' manipulation about needing an extravagant wedding to prove her worth. I should have been strong enough to say, I didn't need all that, she told me during one heart-to-heart. Jackson would have married me if we'd eloped at the courthouse. Lisa and Jackson did eventually get married 3 months after the original date. It was a small ceremony in Jackson's parents' backyard, with fewer than 50 guests and simple, elegant decorations. I attended not as a member of the wedding party, but as a supportive sister. Watching her genuinely happy on her wedding day without the stress of financial ruin hanging over everyone was healing in its own way. The Sullivans had been surprisingly supportive throughout the entire ordeal. Catherine occasionally invited me to lunch, offering the kind of mature, balanced perspective my own mother had never provided. Richard, with his background in business, gave me valuable advice about advancing my career. They treated me like family without trying to exploit me, a refreshing change from what I was used to. Perhaps the most significant change was in how I viewed myself and my boundaries. Before this incident, I had pride in being the family fixer, the responsible one, who could always be counted on in a crisis. I now recognized that role had allowed my parents to avoid responsibility for their own finances and had enabled patterns of dependency that ultimately led to their desperate act of fraud. I learned to say no without guilt and to recognize the difference between generosity and being taken advantage of. I reconnected with friends I had neglected while dealing with family dramas and started dating again after a long hiatus. My world, which had narrowed to managing the crisis with my parents, gradually expanded back to a full and balanced life. 1 year after discovering the fraudulent charges, I received a letter from my parents. Inside was a check for $5,000, a small fraction of what they had taken and significant given their reduced circumstances. "This is the first installment of what we hope will be regular payments," my father had written. "Not because we are legally obligated anymore, but because we want to make amends for the trust we destroyed. We know money can't fix what we broke, but we hope it's a start." It wasn't about the money. It never had been. What mattered was the acknowledgement of wrong, the effort to make amends, and the commitment to change. I deposited the check and sent them a brief thank you note, another small step in our long journey of reconciliation. The experience taught me that true family respects boundaries and doesn't measure love in dollars. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family is to hold them accountable even when it's painful. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stand firm in your worth even when those who should support you the most try to convince you otherwise. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family over money or other issues? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories about navigating complex family dynamics. And remember, protecting your financial health is never selfish. It's self-respect. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps anyone facing similar challenges with their loved ones.